Hi and welcome to Let's Talk. So this is the book share and this will be chapter 4. So thank you for joining me and welcome back. Face to Face with Jesus, by Sama Habib and Bodhi Theon. Chapter 4. Let's begin. I was 10 years old when I first saw the signs of conflict in my home city started. I did not understand who or why great crowds gathered in the streets to march and carry banners with slogans. It was a beautiful spring day with anti-government shouts echoed in the Capitol and drifted in through the open windows of our apartments as we ate our evening meal. What are people angry about, Papa? I asked. Some people do not like our government. Other people believe we must all believe as they do and worship as they do, Mama added. There are men who would have us governed by Sharia law. They would abolish the Constitution and clerics would be in charge. Wouldn't that be a good thing, Adelia asked? To have the laws of Islam rule our lives? Papa raised his eyes, and there was some unspoken signal between him and Mama that this was not a safe topic for any of us to discuss anymore. He answered, Inshallah, it will be as he wills, and all will be well. Mama said cheerfully, it will be settled peaceably. So the Civil War began, and day by day outside the Capitol, the conflict and killing escalated. When the authority of the governments broke down, many powerful men gathered arms. Sorry, I had to take a moment for a second. When the authority of the government broke down, many powerful men gathered armed militias around them and jockeyed for power. 5 groups were armed with automatic weapons, explosives, and hatred for their rivals. The army, the police, the Sunni militia, and the Shia militia were 4 of the 5. The 5th group was made up of criminals we called the Mafia, who masqueraded as soldiers or rebel fighters. They took advantage of the chaos to steal, threaten, kidnap, extort money from an already terrified people. The conflict didn't touch us within the city until the late summer. Then our comfortable, ordinary lives changed. Electricity only worked sporadically, on for a few hours during the day, then off until the next day. Travel also changed. Buses stopped running because drivers were afraid of random attacks. Ambulances could not run either. I remember the day I stopped going to the school in the fall. We saw a burned-out school bus still smoking, its sides riddled with bullet holes on television. Rumors spread quickly about which schools were closed. There may come a day when everyone gets along. Sunni and Shia and Jews and Christians, the reporter said. Until then, we will all hope for peace and freedom. I went to my school to find out if it was closed. No one was there except my friend Camilla. We sat in stunned silence. I looked at Camilla. What do we do? I guess we should go home, she answered. Our parents will know what we should do. We hurried home amid the rat-tat-tat and distant gunfire echoing in the autumn air. Bursting through the door, I found all my family gathered there. Mama rushed to me. "Oh, Mariam, I have been so worried about you." I said to Papa, "School is dismissed." He replied, "You and your sisters will study here at home for a while." I could hardly believe it. My whole life was suddenly disrupted as my eyes were opened to the religious differences that could tear personal lives apart and divide and destroy nations. Right in my neighborhood. Through the autumn, Air Force planes and helicopters bombed, and machine gun enemy trucks carried militia fighters. The aerial attacks did not discriminate between rebels and innocent families, so very soon we were all afraid to travel by car. Abandoned vehicles lined the streets. Sunni Muslims and Shia Muslims, brothers in our religion of Islam, fought terrible battles in the region. Much of the fighting went on just south of my home city. But worse than the skirmishes between armed squads were their atrocities committed against civilians, prominent individuals murdered, the burning of villages, genocide carried out against ethnic groups. It was cold and overcast the day men with guns came to our neighborhood, pulling up in a truck in front of the building next to ours. Pulling up in a truck next to ours, I knew these men were not government soldiers, but some kind of rebel or militant men. That made them even more dangerous. All my sisters and I could do was to keep still and hope they would not come for us. Adelia and I ducked out of sight, fearful we would be shot if we were seen watching from the windows. I heard desperate yelling coming from outside, the sounds of our neighbors begging for their lives. I could not help myself. While Adelia plucked at my elbow and urged me to get down, I peered around the corner of the window frame. The militia group had rounded up the whole family. Father and two sons they forced them into the street. "Tell us where the traitor is hiding," we heard the rebel leader demanded. "Tell us or we will kill you." The militia all wore ski masks. They shouted at our neighbors and struck them repeatedly with the butts of their weapons. One of the rebels grabbed the younger boy by his hair and swung him around. When his father tried to intervene, another masked gunman kicked him savagely. Suddenly, one of the attackers opened fire, shooting his father in his hands and feet. It was cruelty for the sake of cruelty. As he fell to the ground, screaming in pain and pleading for mercy, the militiaman laughed at him. I gasped, my hand over my mouth, stifling a scream. My sister and I clung to each other, tears streaming down our cheeks. My heart was beating so loudly, I feared it would give us away to the gunman. My body shook. Our neighbors were bundled into the back of the truck like sheep. Two of the attackers then jumped into the cab. The others hopped into the back with their prisoners, and the truck roared away. We never saw those three neighbors again. All that was left of them was the blood on the asphalt and the nightmares I had for years. I realized that day that anyone with a gun had power. There was no law. No police would come if we called. There was no one to intervene. Shia Muslims were killing Sunni Muslims and vice versa. There was no control in the country, and nobody was safe. The majority of the population in my country was Sunni Muslim, as we were, my family. My family had followed the Prophet Muhammad for generations. My father was a leader in Islam. I had been searching for peace in Islam, but now I saw, with my own eyes, there would be no peace. Islam is a religion of war, with killing justified under the term of jihad, which is war or struggle against unbelievers or infidels. Yet Muslims were killing Muslims, and jihad exploded in my country with such horrific ethnic cleansing that many Jews and Christians were also killed. Those who could leave the country had already fled, but my family couldn't go out. We were trapped, waiting for our fate, and I didn't know how long we would survive. Soon, our local mosque closed, as it was too dangerous for people to gather together there. But we continued to pray 5 times a day as a family, hoping that one day Allah would stop the war. My father's disappearance. Some months later, a relative of ours died. In our culture, it is important to show respect to the dead and to comfort the survivors. This commitment was even more important since the one who died was Jabir, meaning comforter, my father's uncle. Jabir had comforted and taken care of my papa, who was only 5 years old, as well as his youngest brother and his mom, when his father had been killed fighting as a warrior in World War II. So Papa was adamant that he should go to the funeral despite my mother's fear for his safety. However, he wouldn't allow any of the rest of us to accompany him. It was too dangerous, he said. But we cannot let what is happening around us to keep us from doing the right thing. I overheard him telling my mother, "We must stay civilized, even if the rest of the world isn't." Jabir had lived in another city, so getting to the service would be difficult. No buses were running, and it wasn't safe to drive in a car. But my father and some cousins decided to risk driving anyway, since it would take almost a month to walk the distance. After the first 3 days of Father's absence, my mother was concerned, but always tried to keep what she felt hidden from us. But I could tell she was worried. As more days passed without his return or any word from him, I saw the strain building on her normally peaceful features. Several times I saw her staring out the window, frowning and fearful. I was worried too, afraid what I had seen happen to our neighbors had happened to my father, but I could never express such a thought aloud. Then one evening after dark, we heard the front door rattle because the army had imposed a curfew on our city. Anyone out after sunset could be shot on sight. Mother shooed us into our bedrooms, urging, "Go, lock the door." Then we heard Father calling, "It's all right, it's me." After a month away, Father had finally returned. When Adelia and I hugged him, I saw he was extremely shaken. He told us he had narrowly escaped being killed. On their 3rd day of their journey, he and his cousins had been caught in a crossfire and had to run for cover. Next, they were captured by soldiers and accused of being spies, for which they could be shot. All of the cousins were interrogated separately and kept apart for many hours, with their hands and feet bound. After a day and a night, when the captors realized my father and his cousins all told exactly the same story about the funeral, they finally believed and released. They attended the funeral and then began the long walk back to our city. Father was greatly alarmed at what he had experienced. As he told all of us the story, he was as white as a sheet, trembling. He refused to describe the terrible sights he had seen, except to say there was much death and destruction. My visit to Gamila. Battle still raged elsewhere, but the fighting in our neighborhood lessened. I was sick of being cooped up for so long and eager to get back to some tiny feeling of normality in my life. One morning, without consulting anyone, I made up my mind to visit my friend Gamila. I was old enough to take care of myself, I decided. Mother and father had their hands full. Since Gamila now lived in a different neighborhood, I knew I'd have to be quick as well as careful. Even as I dashed across open spaces and lingered in shadows, I enjoyed the delicious freedom of being outside. Hey, I thought, there's nothing to it. Perhaps I had been hiding when there was no longer a threat at all. I made it to Gamila's without difficulty. She was surprised to see me, but welcomed me warmly. Sitting in the third floor sitting room of their apartment, we chatted as if there was no war. We talked about other friends, books we enjoyed, and favorite music. About an hour had passed when we heard gunfire. It was followed by squealing tires and racing engines. By now, it was second nature to drop to the floor and lie flat, safe from the bullets. On hands and knees, we crawled to the window overlooking the street and peeked out. Two vehicles were driving at high speed, swerving all over the roadway, and their occupants were shooting at each other. Suddenly, the glass on the driver's side of the lead car splintered. A moment later, it creamed out of the street and plowed into a parked car. The pursuing vehicle screeched to a stop alongside the wreck. 4 men jumped out and started shooting into the windows of their quarry. I had no idea who the gunmen were, but instinctively knew once again that the rebels, and not government soldiers. Within moments, no one was left alive in the first car. The attackers dragged the bodies out of the wreck and dumped them on the street in a heap of bloody, lifeless corpses. How long would they lie there? Who would pick them up? How would their families find them? My heart was breaking for the way my fellow countrymen were killing each other. Death was a very real and very close. It had exploded into my country. My family could be next. I wondered, how long can we survive without becoming casualties? Join me next time for Chapter 5. Thank you.